Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today I am joined by Varsha from Reading by the Rainy Mountain. Hello, Varsha.
Hello, thank you for having me.
And the evil Dr. Philip Chase, Nemesis Extraordinaire. Hello, Philip. Oh, God. I I have to take someone has to take away your ability to do things.
Oh,
No more toys for you, Philip.
Oh,
How are
hello,
you doing?
Andy. I'm doing well. It's a pleasure to be here. I just love being here.
mhm.
And we are gathered together to discuss four issues of the Sandman by Neil Gaiman. They were collected together into the volume called Dream Country, and it's Calliope, A Dream of a Thousand Cats, uh, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Façade. Those are the four issues that we're looking at today. So, Varsha, seeing as we can't trust Philip to do anything, would you like to start us off? We'll start with Calliope, which was adapted as part of the extra episodes for season one of the TV adaptation.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's a good start. That might have been my favorite story. I um I did love the story as a whole and the points that it made about um well, one, the question of abuse of this character for your own needs, for like treating someone so poorly for something that in retrospect seems so small, which when Sandman comes to smackdown on our character, whose name now escapes me, uh, we see how he says, "You want ideas? Here, have ideas," and he gives them a ton of them. And then I guess Erasmus Price character was really interesting too. The book that he wanted to get published, they never outright come and tell us, but it seems to be the one that he wrote without the muse. So this question of like authorial identity, if you didn't really come up with what you wrote, or if it's not entirely your doing, can you still take credit for your work, or is it something he killed himself in the end? So I thought those were very interesting threads for me.
Philip,
Awesome. Yeah, I think I agree with everything that Varsha was talking about. I also feel like Neil Gaiman is wrestling probably with his art, with
Mhm.
his own obsession or dedication to, in his case, storytelling and his relationship with his stories and how what he's working out while he's doing that. And this is a thing that he comes back to in more than just this particular in Calliope. He also does this in A Midsummer Night's Dream and in other places. But he's most definitely taking a good hard look and exploring the relationship of the writer to their stories, the artist to the art, and well, where does inspiration come from? What do we sacrifice in order to allow inspiration to take over our lives? And when does it go from inspiration to obsession? So there's some really interesting, I think, questions in there that only Neil Gaiman can explore in the way he does. And it's amazing how this guy can simultaneously get across such beauty and such horror at the same time. I mean, it's just, I don't know any other writer who does that quite so effectively as Neil Gaiman. Some of it is just grotesque and some of it is just beautiful. And it's classic Neil Gaiman.
and I think out of the four stories that we're looking at, there are different elements that sort of link all four of them together, and yet Facade seems to be the one that's a bit of a standout in that it doesn't seem to correspond as well to each other or complement each other the way that the other three do.
Mhm.
Because with this one, obviously the basic story is how does Richard Maddock get his muse?
Yeah.
And we have this very common element, at least to me, that we see a lot in the Sandman as a series. The literalization of the figurative, but also it's story about story.
Yeah.
And that sort of Aurora Boreas explore drilling down into what does story mean? What is the power of story? Why story? Where do stories come from? How do they affect us? And those first three, Calliope, A Dream of a Thousand Cats, and Midsummer Night's Dream, there are elements to those that I think complement each other really, really well, even though they're focused on slightly different things. And yet, Façade seems to be almost the odd one out, although there are still elements of both the beauty and the horror and talking about story and the divine intervening in mortals' lives. So one of the aspects of Calliope that I think is fascinating, beyond the literalization of, this is the literal muse, and that she was Homer's muse, that drawing that connection to our world, to the real world, of making that what we consider the legendary, the mythic, making it real and part of our lived in reality. And then seeing how that talent, that muse, is abused. And even Erasmus Fry, the character, says that, you could persuade, you could woo, you could encourage, but I find force to be far more effective.
Mm.
And that sort of brute force of it. And do we see, well, we know that dream is an anthropomorphic representation of an abstract concept. He is not really a he insofar as sort of biological understanding. He is dream. He is dream of the endless. That's his existence. He's slightly different. So is Calliope. Is she a real person? Is she this embodiment of an abstract ideal? And even if she is the embodiment of an abstract ideal, what personhood is attached to that? How do we think about, from Richard's perspective, this mythic being who until moments ago he believed was completely fictional, was completely metaphorical, and then there's this being, and she's immortal, so she's not human, and therefore he doesn't ascribe human rights to her, rights of personhood to her, and treats her in the most brutal, depraved, inhumane way, because it serves him, it serves his purpose, it serves his will and desire. And he doesn't derive enjoyment from that. It's almost perfunctory, because it's what she can give him. So she is a means to an end. And it is a frightening dehumanization to this treatment of personhood as a means to an end.
Mm.
Yeah.
A few panels later, he calls himself a feminist writer. And,
Oh.
and the contradiction in that, I think, sometimes maybe authors write about things that they don't believe in, sure. But he strikes me as someone who doesn't see the contradiction in what he's saying, that he has that moment of doubt immediately after the first time he rapes her to say, am I doing something criminal? What if he was wrong and he actually gave me a human girl and I'm doing something criminal? But he doesn't extend that thought to, is it okay to act in this way no matter who the target is? Which, yeah, the contradiction there and the lack of struggle there, I thought was very interesting. Or maybe there's
self-rationalization.
Yeah, is struggle. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, right.
Yeah. No, I just think it's amazing how Neil Gaiman, this is a Neil Gaiman theme, really, how he literalizes, but this is something he inherits from his engagement with myth. And you see it all over the Sandman, but it's also in American Gods, and I'm sure in a lot of his other stuff as well. I think he's fascinated with myth as a collective form of storytelling. And the matter of belief is something that he likes to experiment with. Are these actually gods that we can engage with, or what do they represent? And for me, I really feel like in this story, especially, this is not a flattering story to writers, by the way. This is a story that portrays the writer as exploitative. The writer is someone who doesn't care about other things as long as they get their inspiration. The writer is someone who exploits human grief and human tragedy, who is almost like a voyeur, and will do whatever it takes to squeeze that story out, and to the detriment of their personal lives, to other people, to what have you. So I almost wonder if there's a part of Gaiman as a writer who feels like I'm almost like a parasite, on people's emotions and human experiences, and I just feel like I'd have to channel this stuff in order to tell my story and get my, whatever it takes to get the muse, to put the reins on the muse and get the story out there. So it's a kind of brutal exploitative relationship as portrayed here, and he has his he's exploring what it means to be a writer in some ways here, I think. Yeah.
And that is re-symbolizing something that was made literal. So we take that initial step of, here is the literal manifestation of the ideal, the muse, into a real person.
From Greek mythology, and Homer calls upon Calliope and all of that. Yeah.
And we have this very literal surface level read of it about this abuse of this metaphysical being, this deity, this muse, and the hypocrisy of Richard's position, and how he presents himself in public, and how he derives all of this success, and how he then starts to treat other people around him more disposably, getting rid of his agent to get a new agent. The initial film agency that had turned him down, he makes a point seeing him in person to say, no, I've gone with someone else. That he becomes more and more cruel throughout. He becomes more and more like we saw of Erasmus Fry at the very beginning, a more corrupted individual. But then we can apply that abstract notion again and reintegrate it into the abstract of, it's not just about that story about this man abusing a woman, but as Philip, as you said, about the use of any aspect of trauma to fuel an author's need to produce a story, to mine every aspect of trauma around them, these relationships, having destructive relationships, and instead of reflecting on it, using it as fuel for story. And so we move back into the abstract again. We move backwards and forwards between this very literal story about Richard, or Dick, and the more abstract notion of what authors do with these traumatic events, with their relationships, with their interaction with the world, what they take from that in order to create beautiful art that reaches other people. And we see all of these fans falling over themselves, go, but your book was so wonderful, it touched me, it helped me explore these things. And the fame goes to his head. And so, there's moral lessons in that as well, which transcend the specifics of this particular story.
I also think the conflict that, the fact that his works appeal to so many people must mean that he's presumably writing about some depths of the human condition, and yet he seems so clueless about it all, right? He's treating the people around him, and he wants fame, and he keeps repeatedly treating the person with him, like a Calliope, and like that disconnect between not understanding what it is that he's writing about, but yet appealing to so many people while he does that. That's fascinating to me. I don't know that there's any specific outcome of that, but there is also that implication that he doesn't understand what it is he's writing about.
Yeah. I'd like to also talk about, if we can, the relationship with the old Greek myths that Gaiman is drawing from here. Calliope being one of the muses, the muse of epic poetry that Homer, as I said, Homer calls upon. And she is the mother of Orpheus, I believe, who is the fellow who goes down to hell in order to, or Hades as it were, to rescue his wife, and plays her way out of there. Of course, that doesn't turn out as well as one could have hoped. But anyway, yeah, so I mean, she's apparently there are different versions of or different stories about who her the father of Orpheus is, but in some stories there is a relationship between a dream figure. She names him Oneros. Is that what he's naming
So
here?
Oneromancy would be the magic of dreams. So
Dreams.
Oneros, so it's the
The
same.
dream shows up here because he is the you know, he that was his role back in Greek mythology. That was his manifestation, as it were. And so he's there, you know, and he's part of this. And there's this whole old, like, you know, she's his old girlfriend or whatever, and it goes so well, indicating that Dream was kind of a jerk in the past, kind of a meanie pants. And again, I think one of the other threads that connects everything together in this is the idea of Dream or Morpheus becoming more humane, becoming more compassionate. And his decision to intervene here and help to free Calliope, I think, is a key thing in tracing that evolution of this character, which I feel like is the core of this whole thing.
And it's an interesting contrast to what we saw in A Season in Hell when he walks past Nala's tomb or Nala's cell, where he's like, still haven't forgiven you, and walks off.
Yeah.
And, you know, here, initially when she summons the three fates, and they say, well, what do you want us to do? Where is your scroll? Were you bound according to there's nothing we can do. He did everything by the letter of the law. And of course, you know, that is neatly sort of compared to Richard's worry that, oh, well, what if it's a real girl? Because then it's a real crime. But because it's a fictional metaphysical being and deity, oh, well, that doesn't count then. That's different. And it's the sort of literal application of laws in effect. And even though this is according to the law of Greek mythology, we see how unjust it is. And now the Dream has experienced a form of imprisonment.
Yeah.
And has gone through these trials to try and reestablish his realm. When he is called in that moment and he arrives down, he's like, things need to change. And that is such a sea change from where we saw him not many issues ago.
Yeah.
And I think it is a fascinating change because, and again, another excellent point of connection. What was his bargain? Remember when he was talking to Hob, and it was, he sees Shakespeare and he goes, oh, you know, I'm going to give him access to the Dream Library for his ideas.
Yeah.
And so we can see how easy it is to basically make a deal with Dream or to access these great ideas that we dream about every night. Ideas are not difficult. They're not the problem. And yet that's exactly what Richard is doing. All of these horrible, inhumane, disgusting, depraved things for something that Dream looks at and goes, ideas are a dime a dozen. And if you think of the number of times an author is asked, like, where do you get your ideas from? It's like, everyone has ideas. The ideas are not the difficult part. The difficult part is the actual writing. And we see that contrast between what he did with Shakespeare and what lengths Richard is going to go to for access to essentially the same thing. And I thought that was a wonderful contrast that's built up between the two.
Nice. Yeah.
Varsha, what do you think?
Yeah, I like that. I love the relationships between that the Midsummer Night's Dream and this one. I think what you said, Philip, earlier about plumbing everything around you for stories. Shakespeare's son Hamnet says that is having a conversation with someone and says, yeah, my mom says if I die, he'll write a story. Or maybe he has that thought himself, I forget. But Shakespeare is apparently in the process of plumbing everything around him for stories, and it's not doing very well for his personal life. There's also the melancholy that Shakespeare doesn't look happy in any of the frames that we see him in, and I think that ties back to Erasmus Fry and the fact that he killed himself because because he didn't come up with his ideas, or he wrote his stories not of his own doing. It seems to me like that's the interpretation I had of that. And it feels like Shakespeare maybe has a little bit of that too, that that the ideas are not his own, they're coming from elsewhere. That's how I interpreted the melancholy. But like I love the balance between the two stories. Yeah, so I agree with what you said.
And that point that you just raised, that gets brought up in a much later episode, much later issue. That I don't want to spoil it, but your point there about what Shakespeare is feeling and his doubts, that gets explored.
Mm.
Nice.
And it'll come up later. We can refer back now and go, Varsha had it from the very beginning.
Yeah, I was hoping we would go back to Shakespeare. I didn't remember whether we would, because there's a second story that he has to write apparently for Dream. So then, yeah.
No, I would assume that that has to be The Tempest, because that's okay. Because those are the two plays that actually we don't know where Shakespeare's source material came from. He's just probably made them up, or he got them from Dream, I guess.
Yeah.
But every other play he wrote, he took from some other place that story already existed, in other words, and he
borrowed.
That's what they used to do. No copyright back then, yeah, I mean, those are the two that came out of his mind, and they are the most dreamlike of all the plays. So I love that what Neil Gaiman is doing with these. I thought, when I heard that there was going to be another play, I thought that's got to be The Tempest. So I'm glad. So cool.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to talk about some of the others, and then we can go sort of jump backwards and forwards between them to sort of build up any links that we see?
Sounds great.
Because the next one was the A Dream of a Thousand Cats.
Yes. Yeah. Did you want to show any of the frames from Midsummer Night's Dream, or did we skip over that bit?
Well,
we don't have to.
Well, one of the
not Midsummer. I meant Calliope, of course. Yeah.
Okay, well, one of the things I thought we could have brought up in relation to that was there's this wonderful moment, this fear that authors have. The writing, the fear of writing block. I haven't written a word in a year, nothing I haven't thrown away. Do you know what it's like when it's just you and a blank sheet of paper? When you can't think of a single thing worth saying, a single character that people could believe in, a single story that hasn't been told 1,000 times before. This need to be original, the anxiety of having had success with something, and then that building pressure to replicate that success, because we're told that Richard had a phenomenally successful book, and it was his debut novel, and now he's had writer's block because he doesn't know where to go with it, and he feels he's in these dire straits. And this seems so resonant with some of the pressures and anxieties we hear authors talk about, that we can feel ourselves when we go, I need to write this thing, even if it's just and you're just an email or a college essay. And the most difficult part is when you're staring at that blank page, when you're looking at the little blinking cursor, and you go, how do I start? Because once you put a couple of points down, you can always come back, you can edit, you can develop, you can add more things in. But that initial fear, and we see how crippling it is for him. And yet in the grand scheme of things, okay, so return your advance, do something else. But it is so devastating for him that this is the impetus for the horrific things that he does.
Yeah, wow. I have a feeling that there are many writers who could relate to this. I think I don't know as much about like Patrick Rothfuss's personal life or what he's going through or anything, but I could imagine Patrick Rothfuss feeling immense pressure to live up to the success of The Name of the Wind, for example, and that could be crippling, and when it could be, I don't know. I'm not trying to psychoanalyze the guy, but I feel like it could be a reason why we haven't seen the third book. But I'm sure there are a lot of writers who go through something like this. Yeah.
And it was because you had mentioned that moving back into the abstract of applying Calliope not just as the literal person and character that we see in the issue, but as the concept of the authorship and idea of where these stories come from, and talking about all writing and all art and the inspiration, and moving back into that abstract. And I thought that was just a nice moment.
Mm. All right.
But dream of a thousand cats then.
Yeah.
Varsha, what was your take on this one?
I think the main takeaway I got from this is that it takes a very small number of people to make large changes to the world. Except like the humans and the cats who dreamed remade the whole world. And one thing that stood out to me was initially the cats were huge and the humans were small, and the sort of lack of imagination, if you will, in the human dream, it just flipped it around. Like, why couldn't you make a world where both sets of people are happy, both sets of species are happy, right? Like, it just flipped it around, and now cats are miserable. So maybe the cats will do better and create a world of harmony instead of conflict.
Didn't you read what the cat was saying they should go back to, of hunting the humans,
No.
and then you see the image of this cat, this poor human being ripped to pieces. But it wasn't to eat them, it was just hunting them was so much fun.
Yeah.
So it wants to go back to, well, maybe some cats won't want to go back to the way things were, but do something different. But anyway, that's just wishful thinking on my part. But I did really like the ending where they said it just takes 1,000 cats to change what we need. That felt like if you don't like something about the world, it takes a very small number of people to raise their voices and say, let's do something different. And yeah, that was my main takeaway from the story. But there were all the other interesting elements of like the dreaming and flipping the dream and so on. So
Well, and on your point, it just takes 1,000 cats to do this. It just takes 1,000. The response is, yeah. Have you ever tried to get 1,000 cats to do anything?
yeah.
There's a reason they talk about trying to organize academics is like herding cats. It just goes wrong all the time.
That is exactly where my brain went, because I feel like the whole story was leading up to this punchline that the bigger cat says to the little cat. He said, "Little one, I would like to see anyone, prophet, king, or god, persuade 1,000 cats to do anything at the same time." And I had the same, AP, it's kind of scary, actually. I had the same thought as you. It's like, there's an expression we use all the time, that getting faculty to do anything is like trying to herd cats. So, yeah. But yeah.
But Philip, what did you think of the story?
I enjoyed it. I know I mean, aside from the humor of that ending, I do think there was an interesting point where the cats in the story are a reflection of humans, and that this idea of our reversal in roles is also a reflection of our pride as people, viewing the world, like the idea that a cat would hunt humans, and not to eat, but just to toy with them, you know. I feel like human beings have exhibited that type of cruelty toward the rest of the planet for ages and ages. So I feel like there's a message in here. This is a mirror of a sort for us to look up into. And yes, they're cats, but yeah, they're kind of us too, aren't they? Really. And the conclusion where you have the cat who returns home, and you have the people somewhat, I guess, naively talking about its cuteness and everything else. And then the idea that do cats dream? And dreaming, I wonder what cats have to dream about, you know? And we know what that cat is dreaming. It's doing its job. It's dreaming of little humans that it can eat, you know? So, yeah.
And it's so cute as but
Yeah.
and again, that blend of the horror element, and DC's vertical line was a adult comics with a horror theme. Like these were all intended to be horror comics of some kind, at least for a while. And in this, again, we see an emphasis on the power of story. In this case, very specifically, the power of dream, but the idea of, when we think of Dr. Martin Luther King, I have a dream. That the power of story to change minds. Once you've changed the minds, those minds will change the world. That is the power of a narrative that people believe in. If you get enough people believing that narrative, that can shape our very reality. And that, I think, is something that runs all the way through this. And Philip, I think you're exactly right, that we're meant to look at this dream of the cat and go, oh, that'd be a terrible world. And we forget that, yeah, that's what we do to others. That's the world that we live in, that we subject all of these other things to. Like, we are the cats, because we just, as Varsha pointed out, we just flipped it.
Yeah.
And I thought, and again, it's this dark mirror to our reality about this dream that we had to subjugate because we felt we were victim. And instead of wanting the victimization to end, it was, no, I want my turn to be the one with the jackboot on someone else's throat. That's, and again, the power of that dream, the power of that narrative. There's more than one way to resolve that situation. But we see the cruelty with which the owners of the cat, took the offspring because she was was it a blue Siamese or something? I can't believe. And
blue-eyed Siamese, or something.
And these were mongrel because it was a tabby, and we see what she valued in. He was ruthless and with sharp teeth and claws and powerful, and so they took her children, and again framing it as children, not kittens, which allows us to disassociate slightly, but her children, and then put them in a sack and drowned them.
Yeah. And
she's connected to them. She feels it. And that sends her on this quest. And we see both the casual cruelty of it. We feel, because it's her perspective, we feel her pain. And yet we sort of go, yeah, but they're just cats. And we have that cognitive dissonance. We have that juxtaposition of these two worldviews that we hold in our head. They're just cats, but and they war with one another. And of course, that's just illustrated on the page. And I thought that was very well done.
Yeah.
The rationalization that the human woman uses, that, she'd probably just exhaust herself. She's just a kitten herself. Like, she'd exhaust herself taking care of these 3 kittens. I mean, the projection of the human emotions onto the cat to justify your cruelty, I think, I thought that was very interesting. Like, they, once again, sort of like in the previous story where he had this brief moment of doubt, but then didn't follow through on it. Same here with, am I being cruel? But no, I'm actually being kind. I'm saving her from all the exhaustion that taking care of 3 kittens will give her. And I think that was interesting, I thought.
So again, we have that self-rationalization. We have that the stories we tell ourselves to justify our behavior. And again, Varsha, you pointed out exactly that in Calliope, as well as in this one. Like, this thing runs all the way through. And I love how so many different aspects of Gaiman's storytelling, stories about stories and how stories impact us, and the stories that we tell, and that constant intricate intra and intertextual relationship that's developed between all of these things. And it's consistent throughout so much of the Sandman.
Not only do we have narratives that justify our actions, but we also construct our gods in our own images. And in the story, you see the cat meeting the dream, the Morpheus meets Dream, but now he's a cat because this is a cat's perspective. And we're used to seeing Morpheus as a humanoid, but really Dream doesn't have any more attachment to humans than to other creatures who dream, right? Dream is immortal. Dream has been in other worlds and places where there, who knows what life forms there are. But like death, Dream is beyond life, beyond mortality, let's say. And so I love how Dream appears as a giant, cat in this one. Yeah.
And
I was very eager to see what cat.
so here's the entrance to Dream's castle, to Dream's realm. And we see the griffin, the Pegasus, and the dragon.
Yeah.
And we saw them before, but they weren't guarding a cave. They were guarding the gate to Dream, to Dream's realm. And this is because the cat perceives it this way. And the elements, the constituent elements are all there. And we saw this when Nala looked at Dream, that she saw the Maasai warrior. When Hob looked at Dream, and he was dressed appropriately for whatever age he was in, each time the perception of Dream is shaped by the perceiver. That he may exist, but how we see him shifts and changes. It's not necessarily that Dream himself is changing, it's how we are seeing him. That it's the only way that we can interact with this perception of an abstract, that we give it shape. And so it's not that he's changing his clothes, because we see, like in the previous one when he's talking to Matter, that he's wearing the sort of the leather jacket. He's not wearing a leather jacket. There is no leather jacket. There is only Dream and our perception of his robes, of his vestments, of his appearance. It's not actually a leather jacket. That's just what is being seen by the person whose view we have of him. And I thought this was just like a nice illustration of that same thing. It's not just Dream himself, but all aspects of that reality.
It's like in Discworld, Death says that people look at me, but they ignore that I exist because their minds can't relate to what it is they see. So it's like, yeah, I have to give it form to understand it.
Yeah, and the cave is such an apt metaphor as well. You know, you enter the cave and you enter a different realm. It's a rebirth of a sort. You know, it's very mythological. Again, Gaiman goes back to mythology again and again, and I love it.
And journeying to the underworld through the cave. But so the sort of the literalization again of that aspect. Or we could talk about Plato's cave.
Yep.
And this notion of entering the world of the abstract ideal, which there's so many different allusions that we can draw from it. And I think that's one of the clever things about the use of these symbols and using so many symbols in the telling of the story, that it leaves it open to mutually supportive but quite distinct interpretations of it. And so it's at once a very specific story, one that we can identify with, and one that we can understand about this cat having this desire, trying to map everyone or get everyone to do this and say, this is how the world used to be. And we can go back to that if we work together. And then we map it into an abstract about, well, this is what we talk about, that we don't have to accept the current situation. We can work together to make things better, but we need to share the dream. It can talk about the power of narrative and story and dreams to shape the very reality around us, because that's what we do when we channel and believe in these particular versions of reality. We try to make them manifest. And we can see all of these things mapping together very, very neatly, because there's room in this story for those interpretations. There are panels where, yeah, it's symbolic because it's story.
Yep. It's amazing how Gaiman can tell a story that functions simultaneously on all these levels, and it works really well on all of them. Yeah, pretty cool stuff.
And I think the artwork helps. Using the strengths of the artist to get these things across, and like drawing in the dragon and the griffin and the unicorn in a form that we had kind of seen them before. So we make the link. These are the same. It's not a different thing. These are the same constituent elements. And so aspects of the world shift and change, but they are creatures of dream. So they provide a constant. So will we move on to the next one?
I'm ready.
Midsummer Night's Dream. I actually have, I think, an entire video on this.
You do. You do have a video on this. Yeah, it's a good video. Everyone should
So
check it out.
I'll avoid going through any of the points that I made in that video because it would just
Oh,
be
no,
boring and
please.
repetitious.
No, I totally disagree. I think we should touch on those points too.
No, I am far more interested in what you and Varsha have to say. So, Philip, Nemesis, why don't we start with you this time?
Okay. All right. This was fun. This might be my favorite issue so far. It might very well be. Although the one where death was introduced also is up there for me. But this one was a favorite, probably because, or at least in part because I have engaged with the play A Midsummer Night's Dream a lot. It's a play that I've taught many times. And I love the various, I can see where Gaiman would be so attracted to that play, just based on the kind of writer that he is. He's first of all, he's an exemplary writer when it comes to prose, and I'm sure he loved Shakespeare for that reason, just for the beauty of the language, but also just the concept of the layers, and of course dreaming. A Midsummer Night's Dream is called that for a reason. A midsummer being the day in the year when the veil between the other world and our world is most thin, and you have encounters between creatures from the other world and our world. And this is something that Shakespeare plays with in the original play, and it's something that Gaiman plays with in this issue a lot. So that's just a lot of fun, bringing in this sort of, I guess, again, this meta narrative of his, where I feel like he's really wrestling with the, and we brought it up before, but with the idea of being a writer, where does inspiration come from? Is it inspiration or exploitation? Is there a line anywhere between those things? But yeah, and just the sheer whimsy of this, and the beauty of it, but also the horror at moments, because the Puck that is presented in this one is like, whoa, that is horror story Puck right there. And there's a viciousness that goes along with the playfulness of Puck in here that kind of gave me the heebie-jeebies, actually.
much closer to the Celtic fairy than
Sure.
the slightly more sanitized form.
Yeah, I know Gaiman goes back to the real mythology in many cases, and that's what he delivers to us. The scary stuff, because that's myth as well. Myth delves right into it's like your dreams. So myth is a collective dream of a sort. You can see where these things bleed into each other for a writer like Gaiman. If myth is collective dream, then dream is the individual myth. And you really see that working in here so beautifully. And I just love this. Everything that's swirling around here. It's just so Neil Gaiman, but it also draws from some deep stuff that is going back ages and ages. So yeah, beautiful.
Varsha, what did you think of it?
Yeah, I agree with what you said. I don't remember Midsummer Night's Dream. I think I read an abridged version of it a very long time ago. So I couldn't tell the bits that were quoting the play from what was actually in the story. I couldn't tell the difference, but I had a sense of that. But this section had some of my favorite quotable quotes. And to what you said, Philip, this one stands out. Things need not have happened to be true. Tales and dream are the shadow truths that will endure when mere facts are dust and ashes and forgotten. So I love that. And I think, I forget who says that to whom. I've written it down in my notebook, but that as the final conclusion of this story, I loved a lot. And some of the themes that we sort of revisited with the writer and the struggles that they go through, I thought was interesting, especially the fact that Kit Marlowe died. We saw in the story with Hob that he needed validation from that person. And now when he thinks he has a play that could live up to their criticism, he's like, no, I'm not going to get that validation. Now what do I do? I think that potentially adds to the crisis that I have perceived in Shakespeare. I don't know if I'm just reading too much into it, but he just looks sad the whole time. And the fact that his friend died more than just losing his friend, I feel like also the fact that he's not going to get the validation now is probably hurting him a bit.
Was this the panel you were talking about?
Yes. Yes. Yes, it is. So that's Dream talking to Titania.
Although
And that's Neil Gaiman, not Shakespeare.
One of the things that I loved about that is in the beginning it says like additional writing, additional, I think it's additional writing by William Shakespeare is in the credits of this issue. And you're like, yeah, that's classic. Because Gaiman also did something with this that is one of the things that I've loved, which is he makes sure to include the one quotation from A Midsummer Night's Dream that almost every school child knows. I kiss the walls whole, but not your lips at all.
That's from the play of Pyramus and Thisbe, which the comical characters are putting on. Yeah, it's a play within the play.
It's a play within a play in a story within a story.
Yep.
With the characters from the play watching the play about themselves.
Yeah.
Wild. In a comic book where we're reading, it's again all of the different diegetic levels in this, and you could do a whole breakdown on that, and then the metaleptic breaks where they start moving between them because Puck goes in, incapacitates the actor who was playing Puck. So Puck is playing the actor who is playing Puck in a story that he was meant to have been watching about himself.
Yeah, I don't know if there are enough. I know you know all the various sub terms for diegesis and the very different kinds of diegesis and the different levels, but I don't know if there are enough levels for this particular story.
But this is why this one issue of the Sandman is perhaps one of my favorites, because it is so much about story and the interrelationship between different aspects of story and how it is told, and then the relationship between story and audience. So you have the peanut gallery at the back, and they're speaking almost in a modern vernacular. Oberon and Titania are speaking in what we expect is that sort of archaicized formalism. Then you have the Shakespearean play in the language of Shakespeare's time. And then you have the more or the slightly informal speech backstage reflecting the reality of Shakespeare's time. So there are all of these multiple levels of language being used to reflect different things, to distinguish the different types of characters and their social status and their position in the story, and different colors used for that. And so everything about this, in particular, the work of Gaiman working with Charles Vess, the artist, this has to be one of my favorite issues because of all of those different elements. And, we had talked earlier about how Hamnet, Shakespeare said, well, if I died, that'd just make a play about it. And of course, the dramatic irony there is the reader knows, there's the play Hamlet. We know that. We know what is going to happen to Hamnet. But what do we see at the end? We see Titania talking to Hamnet. Right. And we know that the story of the fairy stealing away children and leaving a changeling in their place. And how do we know that Hamnet isn't then in fairy, that he didn't die, that he's actually a prisoner? Which again ties into this whole thing about eternal prisoners and the punishment. So there's that wonderful little moment, and it's not made explicit, but you see Titania trying to steal away this child, and she is apparently childless, which is why she covets it. So like really fascinating stuff with that. But Varsha, your point about Shakespeare wondering if this is his art, or if this was the deal he made with Dream, how much of it is his, how much of it is dreams, how much of it is because of a bargain and not his own true talent, and that eating away at him and making him dissatisfied. And again, like, we see the imposter syndrome that some authors feel. You go, but you did this amazing. Oh yeah, but then there was this person helped do this thing, and that person gave me that idea. But you put it together. Oh well, and the imposter syndrome and the self-doubt. How much of it is what they did, and how much of it was just, well, it's just an extrapolation of that concept that I saw in that thing that someone else thought of. Like, this is just, but no, it's the expression of the thing is the art. So I think that was an incredibly astute point about the position of Shakespeare in this, and him doubting his own ability, and doubting, not having faith in his own work. I thought was brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also feel like there's a melancholy in this story, a sadness that we're coming to the passing of an age, in a sense, where the fairy are exiting the stage, as it were. And it is the sort of, in terms of history, we're in the kind of like a little bit of a pre-modern time, the Renaissance, and the old myths and things are kind of on their way out. And you get that feeling that this is something that Gaiman does in American Gods as well, of course, and elsewhere. But the idea of belief withering away, and there's a sadness to these old stories, which you can tell Gaiman just loves these stories, and he wants people to see their relevance to us today. And it's a point of sorrow that people have let these stories wither, in a sense, because they have so much to say about the human condition. These old fairies, these old myths, these gods, they still say a lot about us, and they are worthy of being engaged with. And you do have this suggestion, though, with Puck remaining behind. The last word in here is that Robin Goodfellow's present whereabouts are unknown. That this sense of a myth and of deeper story still is present in the world. It hasn't been extinguished entirely. It's just waiting there, kind of, in this case, a bit creepily in the darkness.
Well, it's Puck escapes from the comic book because the camera closes in and it gets darker, and then he's gone. All that's left is this void because he's escaped the panels on the page.
Which is brilliant. Yeah.
And where does he escape to? Our world. And then when you think of it in the story, yes, of course, because he hasn't gone back with the other fairy. He has remained in the real world. So there's this real bridging and collapsing of the time of when the story took place with Shakespeare, and the moment when the reader is looking at the panel. That time no longer exists because Puck has exited the comic book in that moment into our world through the comic book in our hands.
And it's perfect because in the play itself, these lines are from the play. If we shadows have offended, think but this, and all is mended. Those lines are from Shakespeare, and that's a monologue where Puck breaks the fourth wall and looks at the audience. So it's just brilliantly done here, and what you just said fits so beautifully with that.
Now look at the top corner image, the top left image. Does that Puck talking to a skull, does that remind you of anything?
Oh, Hamlet, yeah.
And of course, that's been referenced earlier on. It's the multiple layers of that is one of the reasons why I love this particular issue so much. There's so many different ways of approaching talking about it.
No, it's so rich. I mean, I'm sure someone could write a master's thesis on this.
It wasn't a whole master's thesis. It was about a third of a master's thesis on that one issue.
Okay, just a third. Okay.
Or maybe I might have been half. It was a chunk.
You did focus on A Midsummer Night's Dream a lot in that thesis, right? Yeah. It's a phenomenal issue to
meaning
to this, not the Shakespeare play. Of course, you.
Shakespeare play. Oh well, who would read that old thing? Like, what relevance would it have?
Right.
Cool. Well, why don't we address the last story, which is the one that I think, for when it's all bound together as Dream Country, again, it's a standalone story. It functions very much. There's a horror element to it as well. It's this combination and conflict between the divine and the mundane. We can see these elements that have been in the others, but this one feels almost separate. It doesn't feel the same as the others. And this is Façade,
Façade.
story,
Yeah.
the story of I think it's Element Girl, who is a very minor character in DC.
Mm-hmm.
So, Varsha, what did you think of this story?
I was slightly confused by what happened to the character. I couldn't tell if her body was the result of whatever happened to her in that pyramid, or if that's what she had because she's a superhero. But that aside, so there could be parts of it that I didn't get. That was my point. But the main thing that stood out to me in this one was the monologue in the end with Death, how she talks about I am in all these things. It was a full page. I loved that section. And I think her struggle, like the character's struggle with loneliness, I think that exploration I thought was really, really well done.
And Philip?
Me, yeah, I'd say of the four we read for this, this was my least favorite. And that doesn't mean I don't. I'm really glad I read it. And there are elements of this that I find very raw and difficult and challenging, and her whole depression, but that's very real. People go through these things, and that's important to write about. So just because I didn't enjoy it doesn't mean it wasn't great. It is exploring some really important stuff, and I seem to love it whenever death shows up in this series. So in this series, at least, because I like what Gaiman does with this character. So that dialogue at the end, and the idea that the idea of release for this character, Element Girl. I didn't even know that she was Element Girl. So you just told me that, and I'm sure you're right, but I didn't know. I don't think it says it in here. We get her name, Rainy.
Yeah.
But
And I think there was a DC character that I kind of remembered who was a superhero who had these elemental powers.
Okay.
And I think they basically made a female version of him, and she appeared in some storylines. This is really like at the back of my head, and I'm trying desperately to dig up what I remember. But
I don't think we necessarily need all those details to understand that power here is a kind of curse, that it differentiates her from other quote unquote normal people, and it is the cause of her isolation, because to other people she looks like a freak, and that is why she has no relationships, why she's so desperately lonely. So the idea that power is something, and we see this with Dream as well, in a way. Part of Dream's distance, let's say, from other creatures is his power. You could say his not understanding humanity very well in the beginning. You could say is because he doesn't have that connection. He's not surrounded by other beings for which he would have compassion. And so I think there's some of the themes that run through this in this particular story, but this was a raw one. This was a really difficult one, I felt. And somehow, like I said in the beginning, Gaiman can combine all this pain and this suffering and even grotesquerie with beauty, which we get some of at the end, with the sun, So yeah, I'm glad I read it. This was a difficult one, though. Yeah.
And what I thought was one of the things that's interesting is when she is talking about how she became Element Girl, when she got her powers, and she has the dream of it, where we see Ra molding and shaping her and destroying her physical form to create what I think Death refers to as a metamorpho. And she says, but that's not what happened. It was just the orb of Ra in the pyramid. But of course, the orb of Ra is a manifestation of his power, and again, it's the the physical reality versus the metaphysical reality. And linking to what Varsha had picked out from A Midsummer Night's Dream. Yeah, the story isn't true. It's not lies, but it's a shadow truth. It's the truth of the situation, not necessarily specifically exactly what happened. And I frequently and very flippantly and facetiously refer to authors as brilliant liars. But one of the things that sets books and powerful stories apart is that somehow there is an inherent truth running through what is fiction, what is lies, what isn't real. And yet there is a level of truth and reality that runs through it that transcends the physical nature of what happened. It's something more metaphysical in terms of truth. And, you know, I still will call all authors liars. Like you, Philip, you're a liar because you're an author. And no one should trust you.
Are you sure it's nothing to do with me being a nemesis?
Well, I don't think the two states are mutually exclusive.
Right.
Schrodinger's author.
Schrodinger's nemesis. But so just that moment where there's both the actual reality of what happened to her, which was told in a comic book, and the metaphysical reality of what happened to her, where she's being molded by Ra. And so at the end, when we have that, well, she's just talking to the sun, but the sun is the symbol and manifestation of Ra, the sun god. And we have that beautiful moment of connection where she finds peace and release. And it's really, really difficult because it evokes a sense of the desire for self-destruction, the desire for suicide, and the relief and release that people crave that drives them to that behavior, that it has become too much. They can't handle the pain anymore. And we see this at the end, and it is something that brings her joy. And that, I think, is one of the things that can make the reading of this one a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because of its connotations for that level of pain. But we have those arguments and discussions about the ethical reality of euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide, that these are arguments that society struggles with. What do we do in that situation? What is good? Because there are situations when people are in so much pain that this is a release and a relief. And can we have compassion for that? And I think this is a very powerful story about how, where in the first one, there was a person doing a horrible thing and keeping someone in isolation. In A Dream with a Thousand Cats, the world as it exists is unfair and cruel. And here it's this can happen to anyone. This can happen to a superhero. And society just discards us sometimes. And we are left behind. And even the one point of connection she had with the agency was taken away from her. But we then find out that he rang back too late. So is this, while it was a relief for her, we're still left, but he rang back.
Yeah.
Maybe she didn't have to do this. And again, I think that complexity about this story makes it difficult, makes it complex, makes it uncomfortable.
Right.
But, you know, there's a beauty to it as well. And it stimulates these thoughts, these questions. And that is what I see as one of the attractions of great storytelling, of great literature.
Yeah, for sure. I also think it's sad that Death explains to her at the end, well, he's fighting this old battle that the enemy doesn't even exist anymore. So the whole purpose,
the eternal war. It's like he died thousands of years ago.
Yeah. But wait, so she got turned into this for essentially an absent-minded god who's out of touch with reality. You know, this is a very Neil Gaiman thing again. all over American Gods, this kind of thing. But yeah,
think of Dream.
Yeah.
Dream is out of touch with reality. That's how we met him. He has this fixed notion of what the world is. He has not changed. And yet this is a story about a being who their power is change. They can change into any element. And that change isn't necessarily always good. But she was made this way by a deity who refused to change, who refused to evolve with the world and the change of circumstance.
Right.
And obviously, we're quite critical of Ra in this position. Like, there's no, oh, Ra's yeah, he's fine. We look at that and go, no, Ra's wrong.
He's mad.
And that was the position that Dream was in.
Yeah.
And that we saw it start to change, really, with Calliope.
Yeah. So there we go back to the evolution of Dream as a character, his arc through this series, which I'm going to look closely at, here on out, because I feel like that's important. That development of compassion in him.
So, are there any other elements that you wanted to bring up or discuss?
So, to your point about about evoking compassion for people who are in this place where they feel like suicide is the only option, the fact that she's struggling with loneliness, I think, is really significant. If one way to think about it is that it's somewhat self-inflicted because she's aligning with what society thinks that she should look like, and so she can't go out. So she's basically, her loneliness is somewhat self-inflicted. You could make a case for that, but her pain is very real, and she's struggling with that. And that the fact that things could have been different for her doesn't make the pain go away. So the fact that this is a mental illness that she's struggling with that leads to wanting to commit suicide, I think that is a very important exploration for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and her loneliness is again like part of the symptom, I think, of it. She's accepted society's criticism of her, society's view of herself, and then even when she makes the false mask, she creates the silicone face to go out with because that makes her appear more normal. And that's a reflection of what we all do when we interact in public. We have masks, we have personas, we have these characters and these versions of ourselves that we play in different situations. We code switch. That she is us. And her mask slips. And the person she's having lunch with sees her true self, how vulnerable she really is, her inner core. And she can't bear that sight. So again, I think there's a lot of complexity that we can draw from it. I don't think it's a simplistic, straightforward, this is what this story means. Again, I think the use of these symbols allows for nuanced and interesting ways of looking at it and connecting it to our own lives and our own experiences. Because I do find this one particular story difficult. The others, I had nice clean lines that I could follow. These strong sort of themes and symbols, and I could connect it to story and things that I am very comfortable talking about. And this one I felt was much more personal, much more heartfelt, much more connected to darker aspects of humanity, which are less comfortable to confront and less comfortable to talk about.
Right.
And well, on that cheery note, thanks.
Sorry.
But we'll be continuing. We'll be continuing for all of the horror and the beauty and the sorrow and the joy that is the Sandman. And we're going to keep going here. I think Varsha will be hosting the next one, right?
Yeah.
We'll have to figure out which issues we're tackling for that next discussion.
Well, I think it's Season of Mists. It's the Hell storyline.
Okay. And that for me starts volume 2 or whatever this is.
Yeah.
Yeah. part two.
I have to see how many issues into that, but yeah, it's
Well, I think
starting.
is it 0 to 6 of, so I think there's 7 issues.
Okay. Of
So
the hell.
we could probably split it into 2 of the initial thing about hell and then the resolution of that in a different location that I don't want to spoil for Philip.
Mm.
Oh, there's
'Cause
some incredible art in here. Wow.
Oh, there's some art in the comic book that we're looking at. Wow,
I mean,
Philip.
there's some really incredible art.
Your statements are so insightful. Thank you so much.
Look, guys, pictures.
Well, all that remains then is for me to thank Varsha and my insightful, delightful nemesis. Oh,
I want to see if that works for me too.
you know what?
Doesn't.
I need to try and find researchers to find more images of Philip out and about in the real world. For those of you still watching, thank you for watching. Thank you for your continued support, and we will see you in the next one.